A very good afternoon and warm greetings from the beating heart of Africa, right here in Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you very much for all of you for your feedback on yesterday's part one. He called me on Nanas. No, Mr. Willem Petzer. We certainly proved that Willem Petzer is a confounded liar, pathological liar, in fact. Funny thing is, he posts something on his Twitter page, well, not Twitter page, sorry, on his funny neo-Nazi little secret thing claiming, watch the psychopath. I'm not a psychopath. Clearly I'm not a psychopath. I don't lie. Everything I've said, I've proven is absolutely accurate. Everything you say, Willem Petzer, is a goddamn lie, and I'll prove again today how you lie. Now the question is, why are you lying? Because you try to put forward a narrative, develop a narrative by which you will fool people. That's the only reason why people lie. You're a fraud. There's no doubt about it. And if you think I'm talking nonsense, go ahead, sue me. Here I am. I'm not going anywhere. I'm suing your ass. And I'm going to take a whole lot of money from you. But anyway, that's a different matter. Once again, I want to give revolutionary greetings to my brothers and sisters in occupied Tanzania. May I greet you with Izweletu. And I greet you from the warrior ancestors, in the same spirit as the warrior ancestors of all of us. I forgot yesterday to include, of course, Shangan and Bavenda, and I apologize for that, the most profusely. Today, I just want to move as fast as possible and very quickly. I'm dealing with part two, which essentially talks about the Voortrekkers. But before I talk about the Voortrekkers, I think we need to develop a big picture. In terms of the work that I do, I always work from the macro to the micro picture. And I think what's essential, that we understand contextually what the big picture was. So if we go back to Europe, this is before Europeans poured out of Europe. The first major upheaval in natural upheaval or people upheaval we had was the Spanish Inquisition. It started in the early 1000s. That ran for a couple of hundred years, murdering people back and forth. Shame. I mean, these people were throwing poor women, claiming them to be witches, sinking them with a huge rock. If they sunk, they weren't a witch. If they sunk and died, they weren't a witch. If they floated, they were a witch and they were killed. Brilliant. Anyway, thereafter, 100 years later, you had the Crusades, a series of Crusades where you had Europeans going in to fight of the quote-unquote Holy Land and ended up became cannibals. Richard the quote-unquote Lionheart was one of the first people that started eating, were massively cannibalistic, killing about anywhere between 2 to 2.3 million people. The conquistadors, of course, as we know, poured out of Europe in the mid-1500s, went to South America first. And as you may or may not know, murdered anywhere between 25 to 30 million South American Indians, a lot of them dying from diseases like influenza, like the cold. During that same time, that same period, you had the Atlantic slave trade. Normally, we started generally from the late 1500s, early 1600s. And anywhere between 8 to 10 million Africans were dragged out of Western Africa, or the west coast of Africa, may I put it this way. Firstly, were dragged up to Portugal, England, and then were taken to the West Indies, and then on to America and into South America, particularly Brazil. Of course, a lot of Africans were taken to Argentina. But having said that, but at the same time, and in tandem with this, you had the massive depeopling. One of the single biggest genocide ever effected by anybody. And here you had Europeans that came into North America and wiped out anywhere from close to 100 million American Indians. 100 million American Indians. I mean, the number's frightening. In fact, to try and decimate the population of the Plains Indians, what they did was just wipe out, within the space of a year, they wiped out anywhere between 30 to 60 million heads of bison, the bison buffalo, down to a paltry 300. After having, I mean, you can see this picture, they just had mountains of these things. At the same time, you had the English going to Australia and decimated the population of the Aborigines there from 1 million to, at one point, anywhere between 50 to 60,000 people. The Tasmanians, as an example, in fact, the Tasmanians were called the Palawa people. one little island south of Australia that had about 15 to 20,000 people. They wiped them out entirely in its totality. So here you had the backdrop of these Europeans who poured out of Europe, going into indigenous lands, in foreign lands all over, and the first thing they did was butcher everybody. And I think this was a very interesting and common comment when one reads the diaries of people like Amerigo, when people read Bartholomew Diaz, their diaries, they said they were met, and one thing that struck them was when they were met with, they had an overwhelming sense of love from the indigenous people, to the point that people came to Bartholomew Diaz would bear witness that his people his sailors were treated, where they had ulcers, they had gonorrhea and syphilis, which they could not heal in Europe. They were healed by Khoikhoi people in the southeastern Cape. This is I'll post this as well, so you can see these things. In any event, 1508, 1507, 1508, a Portuguese by the name of Francisco de Almeida came past Cape Town, sailing all the way to India. And he passed to the ancient city of Kilwa-Kisawani in Tanzania. He writes in his diary, incredibly, he writes in his diary, the most beautiful city ever constructed, and he burnt it to the fucking ground. And he went to India. He came back in 1510 on a lightning quick trip, and he burnt it down again. Came into Cape Town in 1510, in March the 1st, in 1510. His men tried to steal Khoikhoi women and cattle and sheep and whatever, and they were completely wiped out. And that was called the battle. It was the first battle of resistance any Africans fought against Europeans in the southern tip of Africa. This gives one a backdrop of the caliber of people that came out of Europe. These were all, without doubt, everywhere they went. Prove me wrong. I challenge any of this lunatic, neo-Nazi, racist, crackpot people to prove that 100 million Indians were not butchered by our Europeans in North America. That anywhere between 25 to 30 million people were not butchered and murdered in South America. That the Aborigines weren't butchered down from more than 1 million to not even 60,000 people. That you wiped out the Tasmanians. That everywhere you went, including our northern neighbors, in that the first, between 1904 to 1908, you had the Germans who also practiced extermination of the Herero and the Namaqua, wiping massive genocide on northern neighbors. So yeah, and then let's not even talk about the King Leopold, who murdered 15 million Congolese in DRC. So everywhere Europeans went, you just butchered people in the millions. This sets the backdrop, because we have to argue this scientifically and historically, what happened in South Africa.
We arrived in the Cape. When Jan van Riebeeck arrived here in 1652, he found the Khoi people there, and he bought a little piece of land from the Khoi people, or as they were called, the Bosjesmans. As you can see on this map here, it says the Bosjesmans and then country of the Bosjesmans. And then everything in pink here was what was bought there by the Dutch East India Company. This was around 120 years before any contact were made with black people.
Coming to South Africa, seeing the natives, the Bosjesman. In fact, in all of his diaries, which I have, I've got all of the translations of every single word he wrote, including Simon van der Staal, Adrian van der Staal, Vasco da Gama. This is actually quite available, Willem. You're so doof, you don't even know. Jy praat 'n klomp K-A-K. Jan van Riebeeck knew exactly who the clan he met was. And he met that clan and he named them in his diary very, very clearly. He said they are called the Horing High Clan, led by Achumayo, who later on was adopted with the name, it was given the name of Harry, because Achumayo seemed to be too difficult for these Dutch folk. I mean, he clearly could have, mentioned the name of Eva, because he was a bloody pedophile. But anyway, that's besides the point. Jan van Riebeeck, on first meeting with the Groninger, clearly asked them, do you mind if we're just using this as a halfway house so we can help sailors, give fresh water, some food, we can trade and barter with you? The Khoikhoi said, no problem. No problem. Because everywhere, you see, everywhere white people went, you're welcome with open arms, because that is our nature. But it's your nature to walk into welcome arms and then wipe people out. I've proven it. Your history is very clear. That's your face. Don't get upset with me for what you do. That is your history. Live with it. Get on. Move forward. Get over it. It's not my fault. Don't come and blame me here. Call me a psychopath when you're the psychopath. In fact, I'm still going to deal with you now. So, here you had Jan van Riebeeck, who clearly had no intention of dealing with Khoikhoi people. To the point that Achumayo brought a group of people and said, but we thought you're just going to be here temporarily. We see you actually building permanent structures here. He said, so? He said, no, that was not our arrangement. This land belongs to us. Now, this is one clan telling him. And it's clearly written in this book, and I will show you this book, and you're more than welcome. And this is what Jan van Riebeeck writes in his diary. It's also in the book called Making of a City. They said, clearly, this land is ours. The senior clan to the Groninger, who was a Groninger Kwa, came, and the leader of them, Doman, said, excuse me, Gonema said to them, this is our land. Why are you building these things? What are you doing, building these gardens for and all of these things and these fences? And they kicked the fences down. And they said, if you don't move, my friend, we will go into the hinterland and we will fetch far greater numbers and wipe you out. And they left. Then came the Khoikhoi Kwa. Now, the Khoikhoi Kwa were one of the three biggest clans of Khoina. They were generally referred to as giants. They were anywhere from 6'5" to 7'5", and they were one of the most feared groups. And they were based in Saldanha. They were the Dutch referred to them as Saldanhas, because they were one of the first people when they came down the west coast actually met and saw them on the beachfront. And they were a huge tribe. To one point, the outpost of theirs, where they had 370, more than 370 young men who were herding some of the cattle. They counted more than 400,000 sheep, more than 400,000 sheep, more than 1 million heads of cattle. Also, they came and said, no. This is our summer. This is our winter grazing here. We've had an arrangement with the Groninger that we can graze all the way up to Table Mountain and all the way back. This is not your land. This land belongs to us. So clearly at that point already, this was 1653, the indigenous people in the Western Cape understood the concept of land and who the land belonged to. However, not afraid to share the land. But the concept of ownership was very, very clear in their minds. And this is why the first war broke out in 1654. And this war broke out why? Because Jan van Riebeeck now had cannons, he had far more weapons, far more soldiers. So now he started fighting with the Groninger, and defeated him in the first battle at Lisbie Park, and then pushed them away and said, now this land is mine. You are not allowed to come to this land again. So this is how you people acquired land. This is how land was acquired against the Khoina. But at the same time, one must not forget that incredible resistance, brave resistance was put up by all of the Khoikhoi clans. And particularly, they fought particularly Doman of the Groninger hated Jan van Riebeeck and always agitated for war. and would always lead a war party against the forces of the whites at the castle, or at the beginnings of the castle, during wet weather, when it was raining. So their flintlocks and their muskets couldn't load, couldn't fire. Even though they had sabers and they had short pistols, they couldn't also fire. And oftentimes beat them at war. However, of course, due to superiority of weaponry, these battles continue. So moving forward from this, and this sets the backdrop. These were by and large the people that settled, that went to conquer Mexico, that went to conquer South America. These were generally the first group of people that they sent in. They were soldiers. These were either soldiers, adventurers, or straight mercenaries. All of them were trained to kill. However, the Afrikaner group, the first Afrikaner group, post Jan van Riebeeck, that came in, these people were just ordinary Joe Schmoes. As we know, those that were coming from, they were going to Australia, they were all criminals by and large. Well, criminals, depending on how the quote-unquote crown saw a criminal for stealing an orange, you were banished to Australia. In any event, but the most important thing of what I want to do, I want to share this picture. This is a picture of the development or the peopling of America. And if you see this picture, that Americans crossed over, or people crossed over from Siberia through the Siberian Strait into North America. This is 14,500 to 15,000 years ago. And from that little period, I mean, there couldn't have been billions of millions of people. From that little period, it was a group of maybe 1,000 people that between 14 to 15,000 years could grow to a population of more than 100 million people. So ask a question. And this is just pure logic. Khoisan people we know have got the oldest, most diverse genetics on earth, who have been in South Africa for thousands and thousands of years. More years than Americans have been, or American Indians, quote-unquote Indians, have been in North and South America. How can Van Riebeeck then say that there were only 3,000, 4,000 Khoi? What were we doing? Fiddling? Were we fiddling with our thumbs? Africans have got the highest birth rate, and it has had the highest birth rate. I'm talking from the time they started measuring birth rate of children to women has been a constant 7.1 to average 1 woman in Africa. And you want to tell me, out of all of these countries, we've got millions of people everywhere. The only place we don't have millions of people is Cape Town, where the oldest people in the world exist. And you know why we don't have millions of people? Because we did have millions of people. And Afrikaners, white people, murdered them, butchered them all. Butchered millions and millions of people. And I will prove it. And I will prove it in this manner. So, it wasn't until 1674, a full 20 odd years after Jan van Riebeeck landed, that the force at Cape Town, what's known as the castle, had a sufficiently strong force to take on the Khoisan. Khoisan was an incredibly powerful force, more so because they used tanks, what we know as tanks today, using oxen. And here's a picture of it, and you can see that. And what they would do was rally the oxen with a series of whistles, and the Dutch would be shooting at the poor oxen, and they would be boxed inside and then attack them once they fired their shots. But in any event, after a 3-year protracted battle, and this was also what they did, was they had their ships with 70 guns and 50 guns and 60 guns at the shoreline, bombing the villages of the Khoisan. This then paved the way for the Dutch, the Afrikaners, to now move into the hinterland. Bearing in mind that at that point, and I'll show you a map right now, that there was a number of Khoi clans numbering tens and tens of thousands. I am only naming for you the main clans from excuse my language, from Saldanha Bay and further up to the Orange River, we had 13 clans of the Namakwas along the river, the Orange River, from all the way Walvis Bay, all the way up to past Springbok. We had 13 significantly sized clans, all the way through to the Outeniqua and to the Fish River, where they lived as neighbors with the Amaxhosa. So here you can see these are major clans, and within these clans there were numerous sub-clans. This is without the San, the Sonkwa. And the Sonkwa was equal in number to the Khoikhoi, the Koina. And they were spread all over the place, and there were hundreds of thousands of these people. And this is why the Dutch spent so much time in the Western Cape. In fact, almost 200 years in the Western Cape, getting rid of all of the Khoikhoi and San, so they can move into the hinterland, because particularly fighting against the the Hesekwa were just over on the route to Swellendam, and the Hesekwa were by far the fiercest clan of Khoisan, who used lions like Hannibal used elephants to drive into his enemy. The Hesekwa used wild Cape Mountain lions as they advanced, and were generally known as the fiercest fighters, other than the Outeniqua, who were very good in deep wooded areas. But having said this, so when you look at all of these peoples living here, the only way that whites could get rid of them, other than a extended war of attrition, when they used to go onto commandos. I mean, I give an example. There was a case of Vanderleer, General Vanderleer, English general, who writes in his diary, and I'll quote this. He says he was standing in a bar, and two Afrikaners are talking. The one guy says to him, well, I killed 250 San. The other one said, you only killed 250 San. I killed 325. These guys were boasting about killing 500,000 people. It's just incredible. These people are just pathological murderers. Just horrific to even contemplate. To contemplate this mentality. In any event, 713 was their breakthrough year, and during 713 something happened in Cape Town. Was that a boat came with the sailors were all struck by smallpox. 713 was a smallpox epidemic. It affected between 15 to 20% of the slave population. It affected 10% of the European population, but boy, it decimated the Khoi and the San population, to the point that people were saying, the reports, and there's numerous reports, you can just Google this, more than 90% of every single Khoi, Sonkwa, clan, sub-clan were decimated, up to 90%. That many of them, particularly those like the Khoikhoi, ran into the hinterland, went all the way to the Karoo, and decimated clans as far as they went, up to the Zierveld, just before the territories of the Amaxhosa. So here you got, and this was not the only smallpox epidemic. It came again in 1755. It came again in 1767. And every time, those that grew back, the populations that grew back were decimated again. I think it's instructive at this point just to realize that in 1763, there was an English gentleman. This was during the uprising, the Battle of Pontiac in Canada, where Sir Geoffrey Amherst, who was the commander-in-chief of the British forces based in North America, he wrote to Colonel Henry Bouquet that they need to use germ warfare, and asked them if they were allowed to use smallpox blankets against the American Indians. After using these blankets, exactly the same thing happened to the American Indians, the North American Indians. There, as it decimated the Khoi and the San in the Western Cape. At the same time, I also proved yesterday that there was a massive and focused attempt to get rid of San. We mustn't forget also that in 1903, and I know I'm jumping a little bit, but in 1903, the last license was actually issued at the Magistrates Court in Bloemfontein for a white guy to hunt and kill a Khoisan male. Yeah, this was 1903. It was the last time a license was issued. So when we come back to what Willem Petzer is saying, that the VOC bought all of these pink bits, how stupid do you think we are? I know you look stupid, I mean you look really stupid, but how stupid do you think we must be? To think that people have been living there for millennia, will sell the land to you for you to farm. People have been farming, the Africans have been farming before white people were even invented as albinos in the Indus Valley in 6,500 years ago. Africans invented agriculture. So please don't come tell us that we weren't farming, we were digging little holes, gathering fish and seashells. That was part of our diet. It's horrible to believe that people were that stupid, that we will sell all of the fertile land, go live amongst the rocks. We were decimated. I proved in a piece I put together a few years ago, I proved. So we must bear in mind that the massive devastation, a combination of the smallpox epidemic and the huge protracted and war of attrition by various commandos of the Afrikaner, of the Dutch, the English, whoever, enacted upon the population of the Khoi and San, but more so the massive devastation caused by the smallpox epidemic which swept through the entire southwestern Cape and the Cape Peninsula, the Western Cape, devastated populations to the point that when AfriForum sits and talk about terra nullius, and terra nullius is a nice Latin name meaning vacant land or empty land, and this is where the empty land myth was birthed and the genesis of this. So they just politely said, well, there's nobody living there. Of course there's nobody living there, you kill them. And that is how they occupied the land. So the whole idea of vacant land, land of conquest, which I will deal with in the last issue of Land of Conquest, this is how the land was acquired. So I challenge Willem Petzer again. You a stinking, blatant liar. You did not buy, number one, land was never ever bought from Khoi, not for 1 second, not for a day, not at any single time was land bought, was land agreed to. Yes, land was agreed between whites and not between the indigenous peoples. And yourselves' land was forcefully stolen through murder, through genocide, through germ warfare, like you did all over the world, particularly in North America. And this is how vacant land came about. So, as you can see by this, I'm just about to post for you now. I wrote this piece and presented this piece in May 2015, where I referred to the purposeful and tactical strategy to remove Khoi and San from contemporary history in South Africa, particularly as it refers to the numbering and cartography of the area, bearing in mind that maps were drawn in Paris, maps were drawn in Amsterdam, and were not accurate descriptions. So oftentimes, in terms of cartography, they would leave out settlements of Khoi people, leave out settlements of Sonkwa people, to purposefully remove the volume of people that was present. There is this map in the middle here, which I'm showing you right now, where you can see vast sums. These were massive villages, towns of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Khoi villages, where more than 1 million people was living. Bearing in mind, and I prove again, that various documents, and one of these documents was this document where this book, written by Donald H. Morris in 1861, referred to as an inquiry, the authentic records of the Cape Colony, he proves categorically, and this ties in with a much later document, ties in that more than 200,000 Khoi people lived in the Cape Peninsula alone, and they were decimated. As he says it, they were decimated over a protracted period, woefully decimated over a protracted period of time. We also have Shikaza, who in a book on page 129 of 1989 says, in the mid-17th century, this was after the first smallpox epidemic of 1713, when the Dutch colonists came to settle in the Cape of Good Hope. The Khoi population in the Cape Peninsula numbered about 200,000 people. So this will give us the backdrop. So when I'll do part two of part two tomorrow, this is part one of part two, we can discuss the Voortrekkers and how the Voortrekkers played a significant role in the Vacant. We'd like to believe, and white historians would like to believe, that the Vacant was caused by Shaka. I will prove beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt that it was just caused by white people, a combination of the greed of the Afrikaners during the Voortrekkers, as well as the English, a combination of those two that caused the Vacant. So I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Any of you would like me to elaborate on anything I put forward, please feel free to do so and leave a message in the vid. Thank you and have an awesome